He can barely support his daughter after losing his job, trying to maintain routine in a world falling apart. But everything changes when he finds a mysterious, soaked, and desperate woman hiding in his bathroom. What begins as an act of compassion reveals a billion-dollar scandal and a secret that could destroy an entire corporation. Before you hear this incredible story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more exciting tales. At 6 in the morning, the alarm clock rang for the third time. Mark slowly opened his eyes, feeling the weight of another sleepless night. The room was plunged into shadow, with only a sliver of light filtering through the frayed curtain. He stretched out his arm and turned off the alarm, taking a deep breath before getting up. Another day. Another attempt to maintain normality amidst the chaos his life had become in recent months. Ever since he lost his job as a building systems technician, things had rapidly fallen apart. His caretaker's salary barely covered the rent of the small studio apartment where he lived with his daughter. But he couldn't afford to be discouraged. Olivia needed him. The 6-year-old girl was all he had left. After her mother decided to go her own way, leaving father and daughter behind without a backward glance, Mark got up and walked barefoot across the cold floor to the tiny kitchen. He prepared a bottle of chocolate milk, just the way Olivia liked it. The girl always woke up hungry, and he made sure to be ready to greet her with a smile and something warm in his hands. It was a silent promise he had made to himself. No matter how difficult life got, his daughter would never lack anything essential, especially love. With the bottle ready, he walked down the narrow hallway towards the bathroom. He needed to get ready before Olivia woke up, but when he opened the door, he froze. There, before the broken mirror, stood a woman, completely drenched, trembling from head to toe, her hair plastered to her face and her eyes red from exhaustion or crying. She stared at him with a mixture of desperation and plea. Mark took a step back, almost dropping the bottle. His heart pounded. How had someone gotten into his apartment? The door was locked, the windows too. He opened his mouth to shout, to demand explanations, but the woman raised a trembling hand, making a desperate gesture for him to be silent. "Daddy!" Olivia's sleepy voice echoed from the bedroom. Mark felt his blood run cold. The woman cowered, her eyes wide with panic. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse and broken. "Please don't let her see me, not like this, I beg you." There was something in that voice, something that touched Mark in a strange, almost visceral way. He couldn't explain it, but he felt that this woman posed no danger. Not to him, not to Olivia. There was fear in her, yes, but it wasn't the fear of someone who had escaped a bad place. It was the fear of someone being hunted. "Stay here," he murmured, slowly closing the bathroom door. "Don't make a sound." He returned to the hallway and found Olivia standing, rubbing her eyes with her fists. Her unicorn pajamas were wrinkled, her brown hair forming a messy nest around her round face. "Good morning, my girl," Mark forced a smile, handing her the bottle. "Go to the living room. I'll make breakfast soon." The girl accepted the bottle and shuffled her feet, still sleepy. Mark waited until he heard her turn on the television before returning to the bathroom. He opened the door slowly and found the woman exactly where he had left her, cowering against the wall, hugging her knees. "Who are you?" he asked in a low voice, closing the door behind him. "How did you get in here?" The woman raised her face. Up close, Mark could see her features better. She must have been in her early 30s, maybe 40. Her face was beautiful, but marked by deep exhaustion. There were dark circles under her eyes, scratches on her arms, and the clothes she wore, though drenched, seemed to have been expensive at some point. "My name is Helen," she said, her voice still weak, "and I need help." Mark crossed his arms, trying to maintain some authority in the situation, though inside he was completely lost. "How did you get in here?" "The back door of the building," Helen replied, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "It was open. I came up the stairs. I heard you leaving last night. I saw when you came back. I waited until I was sure you were asleep." The explanation left him, even more disconcerted. "That's trespassing. I should call the police." "Please, no," Helen pleaded, her eyes filling with tears. "Please, I didn't come here to cause harm. I had nowhere to go. I recognized you." Mark frowned, Recognized me? From where? From the convenience store, she said, and something in her tone made a memory surface in his mind. 3 days ago, you bought a sandwich and offered me half. I was sitting outside. You were kind. The memory came back like a flash. Mark vaguely remembered that night. He was coming home from work, tired and hungry. He had bought a sandwich and, as he left the store, saw a woman sitting on the ground, leaning against the wall. She looked lost, disoriented. He didn't think much of it. He just broke the sandwich in half and offered her a piece. The woman accepted without saying anything, and he went on his way. "That was you?" Mark asked, incredulous. "But you weren't... you looked... homeless?" Helen completed, a deep sadness crossing her face. "That's exactly what I was, and still am. Only not by choice." Mark shook his head, trying to process it all. He needed to take Olivia to school in less than an hour. He needed to go to work. He didn't have time for this, but at the same time something prevented him from simply throwing that woman out. "You need to leave," he said, but the firmness in his voice sounded more like an attempt to convince himself than to convince her. "I have a daughter. I can't—" "I know," Helen interrupted him. "I saw. She's beautiful. And I swear I didn't come here to cause trouble. I didn't know where to go, and when you were kind to me, and that night I felt that maybe you could understand." "Understand what?" Mark asked, frustrated. "I don't know anything about you. I don't know why you're here. I don't know what you're running from." Helen took a deep breath and slowly stood up, leaning against the sink. She was taller than Mark had imagined. Even wet and exhausted, there was a posture about her, a dignity that didn't match the appearance of someone homeless. "I wasn't always like this," she began, her voice gaining a little more strength. "I had a life, a job, a home. I was an executive at a large corporation. I earned well, very well, but I discovered things I shouldn't have, and when I tried to do the right thing, everything fell apart." Mark felt a chill run down his spine. "What did you discover?" Helen hesitated, biting her lower lip. "Are you sure you want to know? Because once I tell you, you'll be involved too." "I'm already involved," Mark replied, pointing at her. "You're in my bathroom, so you'd better start explaining." Helen nodded slowly. "It was all there," she said. "In the documents, the contracts, the bank transfers, companies that didn't exist, funds being embezzled, billions. It wasn't just corruption, it was a gigantic organized scheme involving powerful people, and I saw everything." Mark felt his mouth go dry. "And you reported it?" "I tried," Helen replied, bitterness tinging every word. "I went to my boss. He told me to forget about it. Said I didn't understand how things worked, but I couldn't. So I went higher up, and that's when everything started to collapse." "Daddy!" Olivia's voice called from the living room. "Are you going to be long?" Mark looked at Helen, then at the door. His brain worked frantically, trying to decide what to do. This was madness. He barely knew this woman. She could be lying. She could be dangerous. But there was something in her eyes, a desperate sincerity, that made him hesitate. "Stay here," he said finally. "Don't leave the bathroom. I'll make breakfast and take my daughter to school. When I get back, we'll talk properly." Helen nodded, her eyes filling with tears again. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't know how much this means." Mark left the bathroom and closed the door behind him, taking a deep breath. Was he making a mistake? Probably. But he couldn't just throw her out onto the street, not after seeing the desperation in her eyes. In the living room, Olivia was sitting on the couch, engrossed in the cartoon playing on television. Mark prepared a quick coffee and buttered toast. He ate mechanically, not paying attention to the taste. His mind was elsewhere, trying to process everything Helen had said. After eating, he dressed Olivia and took her to school, which was 2 blocks away. Along the way, the girl chatted about the cartoon she was watching, but Mark barely listened. He nodded, murmured vague answers, but his head was somewhere else. When he returned to the apartment, silence greeted him. For a moment he thought Helen had left, but when he opened the bathroom door, she was still there, sitting on the floor with her back against the wall. She had dried out a little, but was still trembling. "Come," Mark said. "I'll make some proper coffee, and you're going to tell me everything." Helen followed him to the tiny kitchen. Mark made strong coffee and poured 2 mugs. They sat at the miniature table face to face. For a long moment they just drank the coffee, in silence. Then Helen began to speak, and Mark realized that his life was about to change forever. Helen held the mug with both hands, as if seeking warmth in that simple gesture. Her hands still trembled slightly, but there was a growing determination in her eyes. Mark waited in silence, giving her the time she needed to gather her thoughts. "I worked at Alliance Corporation," Helen began, her voice low but firm. "I was a financial director. I spent 15 years building my career there. I thought I knew the company, that I knew how things worked, but I was wrong." Mark took a sip of coffee, watching her intently. "Go on." "It all started about 2 months ago," Helen continued. "I was reviewing some international contracts, large contracts with absurd values. At first I didn't see anything wrong, but then I started to notice inconsistencies. Companies receiving millions in payments but with no history, no physical headquarters, no registered employees. They were ghosts." Mark felt a knot in his stomach. "Are you saying it was money laundering?" "Among other things," Helen confirmed. "The more I investigated, the more I found. Forged contracts, fraudulent bids, transfers to offshore accounts. It was an entire system, Mark. Billions being embezzled every year. And the worst part was that it wasn't hidden. It was there, in the official documents. It's just that no one paid attention, or everyone pretended not to see." "And you decided to report it," Mark said, more as a statement than a question. Helen nodded, her eyes becoming distant for a moment. "I scheduled a meeting with my direct supervisor, a man I respected, who hired me, who promoted me. I brought everything, spreadsheets, contracts, receipts. I thought he would be shocked. I thought he would help me. Take it to the competent authorities." "But that's not what happened," Mark completed, already imagining the course of the story. "He was silent for a long time," Helen continued, her voice laden with resentment. "Just looking at the documents, slowly turning the pages. When he finally spoke, he said, 'I didn't understand the complexity of the business, that those operations were legitimate, just structured differently. He said I was seeing problems where none existed, and then he advised me to forget about it and focus on my work.' But you didn't forget," Mark said. "How could I?" Helen replied, frustration evident in her voice. "It was billions, Mark. Billions that should have been invested in infrastructure, in healthcare, in education, and they were going into the pockets of a handful of people. I couldn't just pretend I didn't know." "So, what did you do?" "I went higher up," Helen replied. "I requested a meeting with the board of directors. I brought everything again. I presented evidence. I showed the numbers. I said that if they didn't take action, I would go to the authorities." There was a long silence. Mark could see the pain on Helen's face, the memory of that moment still fresh like an open wound. "They fired me on the spot," she finally said, her voice breaking slightly. "They said I was having a nervous breakdown, that I was delusional, that I needed professional help. They had security guards escort me out of the building. It was humiliating, Mark. 15 years of dedication, and they treated me as if I were crazy." Mark felt a wave of anger on her behalf. "And you went to the authorities anyway?" "Yes," Helen confirmed. "I went to the police. I went to the public prosecutor's office. I took all the evidence I had saved. I filed a lawsuit, and that's when things really got bad." "How so?" Helen took a deep breath. "First, they blocked all my bank accounts. They claimed I had embezzled money from the company. It was a lie, of course, but while the legal process was ongoing, I had no access to my own resources. Then criminal lawsuits started against me. Defamation, slander, corporate privacy invasion. Absurd lawsuits, but they cost me the little I had saved." "And your family?" Mark asked. "Your friends?" Helen gave a bitter smile. "I don't have family. My parents passed. Away years ago. I'm an only child. As for friends, I discovered they were more colleagues than real friends. When I needed them, everyone disappeared. Some blocked me, others simply stopped answering my calls." Mark felt a tightening in his chest. He knew that loneliness, that feeling of being completely alone in the world. He had experienced something similar when his wife left. "And the lawsuit you filed?" he asked. "What happened to it?" "It was dismissed," Helen replied, the bitterness evident. "They said there wasn't enough evidence, that my word against that of an established company wasn't sufficient. The documents I presented were deemed illegally obtained, since I had been fired. It was a farce, Mark. A complete farce." "But you still have the evidence," Mark said, remembering what she had mentioned earlier. Helen nodded, and for the first time, a glimmer of hope crossed her face. "I do. When I realized things were getting ugly, I made copies of everything. I saved them in several places. But the most important thing is here." She reached into the drenched coat hanging on the chair beside her and carefully opened the lining. From inside, she pulled out a small USB drive sealed in plastic. "Everything is here," she said, holding the device as if it were the most precious thing in the world. "Recordings of meetings, original contracts, bank statements, everything. It's enough evidence to bring down the entire company and arrest everyone involved." Mark looked at the USB drive, then at Helen. "If you have all this, why didn't you give it to the press? To an investigative journalist?" "I tried," Helen replied, putting the USB drive away again. "I contacted 3 different journalists. 2 refused to touch the subject. They said it was too dangerous. The 3rd agreed to meet me but never showed up. Later I found out he was transferred to another city overnight. Alliance has a lot of power, Mark. A lot of money. They can silence whoever they want." "And now?" Mark asked. "What do you plan to do?" Helen looked at him, and for the first time Mark saw not just desperation but real determination in her eyes. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I know I can't give up. These people can't keep doing what they do. It's not just about me. It's about all the other victims, about everything that was stolen, about justice." Mark was silent for a moment, absorbing everything he had heard. Part of him wanted to distance himself, protect Olivia, stay away from all that mess. But another part, a part he didn't know existed, wanted to help, wanted to do the right thing. "You can stay," he said finally, surprised by his own words, "for a few days, until we figure out what to do." Helen stared at him, her eyes filling with tears again. "Seriously?" "But there are conditions," Mark added quickly. "You stay on the couch, you can't go out during the day, it's too risky. And when my daughter is home, you need to be just a friend who needs help. She can't know any of this." "I understand," Helen said, wiping away her tears. "And I promise, Mark, I won't bring trouble to you and your daughter. I swear." Mark nodded, though inside he was questioning his sanity. He was sheltering a fugitive, a woman who was being hunted by a powerful corporation, a woman who carried evidence that could destroy careers and expose billions in embezzlement. It was madness, complete madness. But when he looked at Helen, he saw not a threat, but a broken person trying to do the right thing in a world that didn't reward honesty. And maybe, just maybe, he could help her find a way out. "Take a shower," he said, getting up. "I'll leave a towel and some of my clothes. They won't fit perfectly, but it's better than those wet clothes. Then you can rest. You look like you haven't slept in days." "Thank you," Helen whispered. "Truly, Mark. Thank you for believing in me." He just nodded and left the kitchen. As he sorted out clean clothes and a towel, Mark wondered what on earth he was doing. Was he putting his daughter at risk? Was he being naive? But then he remembered Helen's gaze, the sincerity in her voice, the genuine desperation, and he decided to trust his instinct. Later, when Helen emerged from the shower, dressed in his clothes that were too loose, Mark prepared a simple meal: rice, beans, and scrambled eggs. They ate in silence, both exhausted in different ways. When she finished, Helen curled up in the blanket Mark had left on the couch and fell asleep almost instantly. Mark watched her for a moment, still processing everything. Then he went to his bedroom, lay on the bed, and stared at the ceiling, his mind buzzing with confused thoughts and growing worries. Had he made the right choice? He had no answer, only the certainty that, from that moment on, nothing would ever be the same. The next 3 days passed in a strange and tense routine. Mark woke up early, got Olivia ready for school, worked in the building where he was a caretaker, and returned home to find Helen exactly where he had left her. She remained discreet, almost invisible. She cleaned the apartment, organized things, tried to be helpful without being intrusive. Olivia, with the natural curiosity of a 6-year-old, had asked about the lady on the couch on the very first day. Mark explained that Helen was a friend who was going through difficulties and needed a place to stay for a few days. The girl accepted the explanation without questioning, as children often do. In fact, Olivia seemed to like Helen's presence. The woman had a natural kindness with the child, chatted with her about cartoons, helped her with homework, brushed her hair before school. There was a tenderness in those interactions. That touched Mark in an unexpected way. On the third day, while Olivia was asleep and they were sitting at the kitchen table after dinner, Helen finally began to talk about her life before everything fell apart. "I always wanted to have a family," she said softly, looking towards the room where Olivia slept. "But I dedicated so much time to my career that I never found the right person. Or maybe I never gave myself time to find them. And now I look back and see how much time I wasted chasing things that ultimately don't matter. The things that matter are here," Mark replied, gesturing to encompass the small apartment. "They may not seem like much, but it's real, it's honest." Helen smiled sadly. "You're right. And your daughter is lucky to have a father like you. She can see that you love her in every gesture, in every look." Mark felt his face flush with the compliment. "I do what I can. It's not always enough, but—" "It's more than enough," Helen interrupted him. "Believe me, I've worked with executives who earned millions and barely knew their own children's names. You may not have much money, but you have what really matters." Their conversation was interrupted by a noise in the building's hallway. Heavy footsteps coming up the stairs. Mark wouldn't have paid attention if it weren't for the way Helen stiffened, her face instantly paling. "What is it?" he asked, alarmed. "The footsteps," she whispered. "They stopped on our floor." Mark slowly stood up, his heart beginning to pound. He walked to the door and peeked through the peephole. In the hallway there was a man he had never seen before, tall, wearing an expensive grey suit, perfectly combed hair. The man was standing in front of the neighbor's apartment door, looking around as if checking something. "Do you know him?" Mark whispered to Helen, who carefully approached. She peeked quickly and recoiled as if she had received a shock. "It's Victor," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He works for Alliance Corporate Security. Mark, they found me." The panic in her voice made Mark's blood run cold. He peeked through the peephole again and saw the man knock on the neighbor's door. Mrs. Rose, the elderly lady who lived alone, opened it. The man showed something, probably an ID, and began to talk to her. "He's asking about you," Mark whispered. "He's checking apartment by apartment." "I need to get out of here," Helen said, her breathing accelerating. "I need to leave before he gets here. I can't put you and Olivia in danger." Mark looked at her, then at the room where his daughter slept, then at the man in the hallway. His instinct was to agree, to send Helen away, to protect Olivia at all costs. But then he thought about how kind Helen had been to his daughter, how she had tried to do the right thing and lost everything because of it. He thought about what it would be like to hand her over to those people who were hunting her. "No," he said, surprising himself. "You stay, but you need to hide." "Mark, I can't—" "Yes, you can," he interrupted her, already thinking quickly. "The built-in wardrobe in my bedroom, it's big, you'll fit inside. Go quickly and don't make any noise." Helen hesitated only for a second before rushing to the bedroom. Mark heard her open the wardrobe and squeeze inside. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. Then he returned to the living room and turned. On the television, pretending to be watching some show. When the knock on the door came a few minutes later, Mark waited a moment before answering, trying to seem natural. He opened the door and found the man in the grey suit smiling politely. "Good evening," the man said, his voice cordial but cold. "My name is Victor. I work for Alliance Corporation. Could I steal a few minutes of your time?" "Of course," Mark replied, keeping his voice steady. "How can I help you?" Victor looked over Mark's shoulder, trying to peek inside the apartment. "We're looking for a person, a woman. She may be in danger, and we need to locate her for her own safety." He extended a mobile phone showing a photo. It was Helen, but in very different circumstances. Neat hair, impeccable makeup, smiling at a corporate event. She looked like a different person. "Do you recognize this woman?" Victor asked, his eyes fixed on Mark's face. "She may have passed through this area in the last few days." Mark studied the photo for a moment, then shook his head. "No, I've never seen her. Who is she?" "A former employee who is confused," Victor replied, putting his phone away. "She's ill and needs medical treatment. Her family is very worried." "I understand," Mark said, feeling anger grow within him. It was all a lie, he knew. "But I'll keep an eye out. If I see anyone like that, who should I call?" Victor took a card from his pocket and handed it over. "You can call me directly, any time of day or night. We're offering a generous reward for information leading to her." "How much?" Mark asked, trying to sound interested. 50,000, Victor replied, observing Mark's reaction. "In cash, no questions asked." It was an absurd amount, more than Mark earned in years of work. He pretended to think for a moment, then nodded. "I'll keep my eyes open. If I see anything, I'll get in touch." "Thank you," Victor said, but his eyes held a coldness that contradicted his polite tone. "And one thing, Mr. Mark," he completed. "Mark Sallin." "Mr. Mark," Victor continued, "if by any chance you have already seen this woman and are not telling us, know that this would be a grave mistake. Alliance does not like obstruction, and we have the resources to find out the truth, always." It was a veiled but clear threat. Mark forced a smile. "I understand perfectly, but as I said, I've never seen this woman." Victor studied him for another moment, then nodded. "Have a good night, Mr. Mark." Mark closed the door and stood there, his heart pounding in his chest. He waited until he heard the footsteps recede down the hallway before releasing the breath he had been holding. His hands trembled slightly. He walked to the bedroom and opened the wardrobe. Helen was huddled among the clothes, her face pale and her eyes wide. "He's gone," Mark whispered. "You're safe. For now." Helen struggled out of the wardrobe, her legs trembling. "Mark, I'm so sorry. I didn't want to bring this to you. I should have left earlier." "Too late now," Mark replied, not with anger but with determination. "He's already been here. If you disappear now, he'll be suspicious, and he'll come back." "So what do we do?" Helen asked, her voice laden with despair. Mark thought for a moment, looking at the card Victor had given him. "We have to be smarter than them. We need a plan." "What kind of plan?" Mark looked at her, an idea beginning to form in his mind. A risky idea, perhaps crazy, but one that might work. "If they want to find you, then we need to ensure that when they do find you, it's on our terms, not theirs." Helen stared at him, trying to understand what he meant. Mark didn't have all the answers yet, but one thing was clear. They could no longer just hide and wait for everything to pass. They needed to act, and they needed to act soon, before it was too late. That night, Mark barely slept. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking of all the ways it could go wrong. But he also thought of Helen, of the courage she had to expose corruption, even knowing the risks. He thought of Olivia and the kind of world he wanted her to grow up in, a world where doing the right thing didn't cost everything. When he finally fell asleep, dawn was already breaking, and his dreams were filled with shadowy figures chasing him through endless corridors. The next morning, Mark woke up with a half-formed plan in his head. While preparing breakfast and getting Olivia ready for school, his brain worked frantically, connecting dots, thinking about possibilities. Helen was awake on the couch, pale and with deep, dark circles under her eyes. It was clear she hadn't slept well either. After dropping Olivia off at school, Mark quickly returned home. Helen was waiting for him at the kitchen table, a mug of cold coffee in her hands. "I thought of something overnight," Mark began, sitting down opposite her. "If the authorities didn't listen to you before, and if the press is afraid to touch the subject, then we need another approach." "What kind of approach?" Helen asked, a spark of hope appearing in her tired eyes. Mark took a deep breath. "The internet, social media. If we put everything online, live, for thousands of people to see at the same time, they won't be able to suppress it. They won't be able to silence it. It will be too late." Helen was silent for a moment, processing the idea. "It's risky," she said finally. "Very risky. They'll know immediately where the broadcast is coming from. They'll track us." "That's why it can't be from here," Mark explained. "And it can't be from my phone or yours. It needs to be from a public place with open internet, where they can track us but not reach us in time." "An internet cafe," Helen said, understanding. "But still, Mark, that puts us in real danger. Victor won't just accept it. He'll come after us." "I know," Mark admitted. "But staying hidden isn't sustainable either. Sooner or later they'll find you. At least this way, if we manage to broadcast, the evidence will be available to everyone. Even if something happens to us, the truth will be out there." "And Olivia?" Helen asked, concern evident in her voice. "You can't put her at risk because of me." "I'll ask her to stay with Mrs. Rose, the neighbor," Mark replied. "I'll say I have an urgent appointment. She's stayed there a few times before. She'll be safe." Helen bit her lip, clearly torn. "I don't know, Mark. This is asking too much of you. You've already done so much." "It's the right thing to do," Mark interrupted her firmly. "And I need to do it. Not just for you, for me too, for Olivia, for all the people who have been harmed by this scheme. Someone needs to take a stand." Helen's eyes filled with tears. "Why are you doing this? You barely know me. Why risk everything?" Mark thought about the question. He thought about his own life, the past years of struggles and difficulties. He thought about how the system had failed him too, in different but equally painful ways. He thought about Olivia and the world he wanted to build for her. "Because if I do nothing, I'm part of the problem," he replied simply. "And because you don't deserve to go through this alone." Helen reached across the table and held his hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "No matter what happens, thank you for believing in me." They spent the rest of the morning planning. Helen explained exactly what was on the USB drive and how they should present the information. Mark suggested broadcasting at peak online hours, when more people would be connected. They decided it would be the next day in the afternoon, giving them time to prepare properly. Mark used his knowledge as a former systems technician to think about practical details. How to create an anonymous account for the broadcast. How to ensure the video would be automatically saved, even if they were interrupted. How to quickly disseminate the link to ensure views. "We have to be fast," he explained. "Get in, set up, start the broadcast and get out. 15 minutes maximum. Anything beyond that increases the risk of being caught." "And then?" Helen asked. "After the broadcast, where do we go?" Mark had thought about that too. "I have a friend," he said. "Aaron. We worked together for years. He became a police officer after I left the technical field. He's a good person. We can trust him. After the broadcast, we'll go look for him. With the evidence already public, he can help us get in touch with the right people." Helen nodded, looking more hopeful than in recent days. "It might work," she said. "It really might work." That afternoon, Mark went to work as usual, but his mind was elsewhere. As he cleaned hallways and fixed small problems in the building where he worked, he mentally reviewed each step of the plan. Where were the flaws? What could go wrong? How could they minimize the risks? On his way back home, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. A black car was parked on the other side of the street, right in front of his building, and inside Mark could see the silhouette of someone at the wheel, waiting, watching. He forced himself to remain calm and entered the building normally, as if he hadn't noticed anything, but his heart pounded as he climbed the stairs. When he entered the apartment, he found Helen at the window, peeking through the curtains. "Did you see?" she asked as soon as he closed the door. "The black car," Mark confirmed. "How long has it been there?" "It arrived around noon," Helen replied. "The driver hasn't left once. I think they're watching us." Mark walked to the window and discreetly peeked out. The car was still there, motionless. "They know you're here," he said. "Or at least they suspect." "Then we need to leave," Helen said, urgency in her voice. "Now. Tonight." Mark shook his head. "No. If we leave now, they'll follow us, and we won't have any advantage. We need to stick with the plan. Tomorrow, as planned." "Mark, look at that car," Helen insisted. "They're watching us. How are we going to leave without them noticing?" Mark thought for a moment, then smiled. "Through the back. I know this building better than anyone. There's a service exit that leads directly to the back street. They might be watching the front, but they're not watching all the exits. What if they are? Then we improvise, Mark replied, more confident than he actually felt. That night, Mark picked up Olivia from school as usual. When they returned, the black car was still there. Helen had hidden in the bedroom, staying away from the windows. Olivia, oblivious to everything, had dinner and watched her cartoons before going to bed. After the girl fell asleep, Mark and Helen sat at the kitchen table once more. They spoke in whispers, planning every detail of the next day's escape. Mark would draw a map of the streets, showing the route they would take. Helen would review the documents on the USB drive one more time, ensuring everything was there. "Mark," Helen said at one point, her voice serious, "if something goes wrong tomorrow, if they catch us, I want you to know that it's not your fault. You're doing something incredible, something brave." "Nothing will go wrong," Mark replied, though he wasn't entirely sure. "We'll make it. We have to make it." "But if it does," Helen insisted, "if something happens to me, promise you'll take care of Olivia, that you'll keep her safe, that you'll continue to be the wonderful father you are." Mark felt a lump in his throat. "I promise," he said, "but it won't come to that. We'll get through this together, all three of us, you, me, and Olivia." Helen smiled, a tear rolling down her face. "When all this started, I had nothing left. No hope, no reason to keep fighting. But now I have you two, and that changes everything." Mark held her hand across the table. "You're not alone," he said. "Not anymore." They stayed like that for a moment, hands intertwined, united by a common purpose and by something deeper that neither of them was ready to name yet. Outside, the black car continued its silent vigil. But inside the small apartment, there was hope, there was determination, and there was, for the first time in a long time for both of them, the feeling of belonging to something greater than themselves. When they finally went to sleep, each in their own place, Mark lay awake listening to the sounds of the night, the distant traffic, the wind in the windows, Olivia's soft breathing in the next room, and coming from the living room, Helen's small movements as she tried to find a comfortable position on the couch. Tomorrow would be the day. For better or worse, they would take a stand, and Mark just hoped that when it was all over, they would still be together and whole. The day dawned cloudy, with a threat of rain. Mark woke up before the alarm, his stomach churning with nervousness. He got up silently and found Helen already awake in the living room, sitting on the couch with her knees hugged to her chest. "Ready?" he asked in a low voice. She nodded, but Mark could see the fear in her eyes. "The black car is still there," he said, more as a statement than a question. "It is," Helen confirmed. "I saw it when I woke up. There's someone different at the wheel now. They must be taking shifts." Mark walked to the window and discreetly peeked out. Indeed, there was a different man in the car, younger, wearing sunglasses despite the cloudy weather. He was holding a mobile phone, probably communicating with someone. "We're sticking with the plan," Mark said, turning to Helen. "I'll drop Olivia off at school, come back to pick her up, and take her to Mrs. Rose's house. Then we'll leave through the back. They can't follow us if they don't see us leave." "What if they follow us anyway?" Mark touched the pocket where he had put the card Victor had given him. "I called the number last night from a public phone," he said. "I left an anonymous message saying I'd seen the woman in the photo at the market on the other side of town. If they take the bait, they'll have to split resources." Helen looked at him with admiration. "You thought of everything." "I tried," Mark replied, though he didn't feel as confident as he sounded. "But we still need luck." The morning passed in slow motion. Mark got Olivia ready, took her to school, returned to the apartment. The black car remained there, a menacing and constant presence. But when Mark left again to pick up his daughter, he noticed that there was only one man watching now. Perhaps the bait had partially worked. At school, Mark explained, to Olivia, that she would spend the afternoon with Mrs. Rose because he and Helen had something important to do. The girl accepted without complaint, though she seemed disappointed not to be able to spend time with Helen. As he left Olivia with the neighbor, Mark felt a pang of guilt. What if something went wrong? What if he didn't come back? But he pushed those thoughts away. He had to believe it would work out. Back in the apartment, he found Helen ready. She had put on the best clothes Mark had, still too loose but decent. The USB drive was safely in her coat pocket. Her eyes showed determination mixed with fear. "It's time," Mark said. "Ready?" Helen took a deep breath. "Ready." They left the apartment and went down the service stairs that led to the back of the building. Mark knew every step, every turn. He had worked there for months. The back door creaked open, and he winced at the sound, but there was no reaction from outside. The back street was empty. Mark and Helen walked quickly, staying close to the buildings, avoiding drawing attention. At each corner, Mark checked if they were being followed. For now, nothing. The Internet Cafe was a 20-minute walk away. It was a small, somewhat hidden place, frequented mainly by students. Mark had chosen it specifically for that reason. They would have relative privacy and fast internet. When they arrived, the place was almost empty. Only 2 teenagers playing video games on the back computers and a bored employee behind the counter. Mark paid for an hour at one of the more isolated computers, and they sat down together. Helen inserted the USB drive with trembling hands. Mark set up the live streaming account he had created night before using a temporary email. Everything was ready. All that was left was to press the start button. "Are you sure about this?" Helen asked one last time. "I am," Mark replied, though his heart was pounding. "Let's go." Helen pressed the button. The broadcast began, and there was no turning back. "My name is Helen," she began, her voice initially weak but gaining strength. "And I need to tell a story about corruption, about billions embezzled, about powerful people who think they are above the law. This is my story, and these are the proofs." She began to share the screen, showing the documents, forged contracts, suspicious transfers, ghost companies, audio recordings of compromising conversations. Everything was there, exposed for anyone to see. Mark monitored the comments and the number of views. It started slowly, but then someone must have shared the link because the numbers exploded. 10 people, 100, 1,000, 5,000. The video was going viral. Helen spoke for almost 10 minutes, explaining each document, contextualizing each piece of evidence. Her voice was clear, determined. She was no longer the broken woman Mark had found in his bathroom. She was a woman, fighting for justice. Then the Internet Cafe door burst open. Mark looked up and felt his blood run cold. It was Victor, accompanied by another equally large and intimidating man. Their eyes found Mark and Helen immediately. "We need to go," Mark whispered urgently. "Now!" But Helen kept speaking, accelerating her pace, trying to cover as much as possible before they were interrupted. Mark saw Victor advance towards them and made a decision. He stood up and stood between Victor and Helen, blocking the way. "Get out of the way," Victor said, his voice low and threatening. "No," Mark replied, his heart pounding. "Let her finish." "You don't know who you're dealing with," Victor advanced. "Get out of the way or you'll regret it." But Mark didn't move. Behind him, Helen continued speaking, her voice filling the space as the viewership numbers climbed higher and higher. 15,000, 20,000, 30,000. It was working. The truth was being exposed. Victor made a move to get around Mark, but the other man accompanying him held his arm. "Too many people are watching," he whispered, pointing at the screen. "If we do anything here, now, it will make everything worse." Victor hesitated, clearly torn between stopping them and avoiding creating an even bigger scene. And it was in that moment of hesitation that Helen spoke the final words. "This evidence is now public. It has been automatically saved on multiple platforms. It can no longer be erased. It can no longer be hidden. The truth is exposed. And now it is up to the authorities and society to act. My name is Helen, and I will no longer hide." She ended the broadcast and pulled the USB drive from the computer. "Mark, let's go," she said, standing up. They ran towards the back door of the establishment. Victor tried to follow them, but the Internet Cafe employee who had watched everything stepped into his path. "Hey, you can't leave without paying." It was the distraction they needed. Mark and Helen escaped through the back door and found themselves in a narrow alley. They ran without looking back, turning corners, cutting through paths, using all of Mark's knowledge of the streets in that area. Finally, breathless and with trembling legs, they stopped in an alley between two residential buildings. Mark peeked to see if they were being followed. For now, nothing. "We did it," Helen said between heavy breaths, an incredulous smile on her face. "Mark, we did it." "Not yet," Mark replied, though he felt a wave of relief and euphoria. "We need to find Aaron, now." They left the alley and walked quickly towards the police station where Aaron worked. Mark called his friend from a public phone, quickly explaining the situation. Aaron said he would meet them at a discreet coffee shop near the station. When they arrived, Aaron was already waiting. He was a robust man, about 40, with grey hair at his temples and an attentive gaze. He hugged Mark tightly. "Man, what on earth have you gotten yourself into?" Aaron asked, looking from Mark to Helen. "It's a long story," Mark replied, "and we need help, serious help." They sat at a table at the back of the coffee shop, and for the first time Mark and Helen told the full story. Aaron listened in silence, his face growing more serious as the details emerged. When they finished, Aaron was quiet for a long moment. "This is big," he said finally. "Very big. It's going to stir up powerful people." "I know," Helen said. "That's why I need protection. Not just for me, but for Mark and his daughter. They have nothing to do with this originally, but now they're involved." Aaron nodded. "I know someone, a federal agent who deals with corporate corruption. She's serious, competent. If anyone can help, it's her. I'll make contact." He took out his phone and dialed. He spoke in a low voice for a few minutes, then hung up. "She wants to meet us, tonight. But it has to be discreet." "Where?" Mark asked. "There's a hotel on the outskirts of the city, small, discreet. She'll book a room. And meet us there. We can go in my car. No one will suspect." Mark looked at Helen, who nodded. "Then let's go," he said. "The sooner the better." "But first," Aaron added, "you need to pick up your daughter and ensure she stays safe until this is over." Mark agreed. He called Mrs. Rose and explained that Olivia would need to stay longer with her. The neighbor, always kind, accepted without problems. Mark promised to pick her up as soon as possible and thanked her profusely. As they drove towards the hotel on the outskirts of the city, Mark looked out the window. The sky had darkened and it was finally starting to rain. He thought about everything that had happened in the last few days. How his life had completely changed. How a simple decision to help a stranger had led to all this. Next to him in the back seat, Helen also looked out the window, but when she felt Mark's gaze, she turned and gave him a small smile. A tired but genuine smile. A smile that said without words that, despite everything, she was grateful, and that she was no longer alone in that fight. The hotel was exactly as Aaron had described, small, discreet, and seemingly anonymous. It was on the road leading out of the capital city, surrounded by trees and with few other establishments nearby. The kind of place where people don't ask questions. Aaron parked the car in the back and they entered through the side door. The lobby was empty except for the receptionist, who barely looked up from her magazine. They went up to the room on the second floor that Aaron had mentioned. The door was ajar. Inside, a woman was sitting in one of the chairs near the window. She must have been in her 50s, short grey hair, penetrating eyes, and a posture that conveyed immediate authority. She wore casual but good quality clothes, and when she stood up to greet them, Mark noticed the discreet weapon strapped to her belt. "Agent Fiona Carmin," she introduced herself, extending her hand first to Helen, then to Mark. "Corporate Crimes, Federal Division. Aaron has briefed me on the situation, but I want to hear it directly from you." They sat down and once again Helen told her story, but this time there were more details, more context. She spoke about her career at Alliance, about the clues she began to notice, about her personal investigation. She spoke about the meeting with her supervisor, the attempt to escalate to the board, the sudden and humiliating dismissal. Then came the reprisals, the blocked accounts, the false lawsuits, the persecution, the veiled threats that became increasingly direct. how she lost everything and found herself living on the streets, fleeing shadows, with nowhere to go. "And then," she said, looking at Mark with tenderness, "I found someone who still believed that doing the right thing mattered, someone who risked everything to help. Me. And together, we decided it was time to stop running and start fighting." Fiona listened in silence, taking occasional notes in a small pad. When Helen finished, the agent was quiet for a long moment, organizing her thoughts. "May I see the evidence?" she finally asked. Helen hesitated only for a second before taking the USB drive from her pocket. It was the most precious possession she had, the only thing that stood between her and complete destruction. But something in Fiona's eyes conveyed trust. She handed over the device. Fiona inserted the USB drive into her laptop and began to examine the files. Her eyes moved quickly across the screen, absorbing information, making connections. Occasionally, she paused to examine a document more closely or to play an audio clip. Almost 30 minutes passed before she spoke again. "This is gold," she said finally, removing the USB drive and handing it back to Helen. "This is exactly the kind of irrefutable evidence we need. Contracts, recordings, financial transactions, everything documented, dated, verifiable." "So you can do something?" Helen asked, hope evident in her voice. "I can, and I will," Fiona replied. "Alliance is big, they have resources, they have lawyers. But with this evidence, they have no defense. I will take this to my superiors immediately. They must already be aware of the broadcast you made today. Half the country saw it. Public pressure will force swift action." "What about protection?" Mark asked. "Helen is being hunted. There are dangerous men looking for her." "I will arrange immediate police protection," Fiona said. "For both of you, and for your daughter too," she added, looking at Mark. "Until this situation is resolved and all involved are in custody, you will be under surveillance." "For how long?" Helen asked. "Days, perhaps." "Weeks," Fiona replied honestly. "It depends on how quickly we can build the case and make the arrests, but I can promise you we will make it happen. With this evidence and the public attention the case is receiving, there's no way to sweep this under the rug." Mark felt a huge weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time in days, he felt that perhaps they really would get out of this situation whole. "There's one thing I need to know," Fiona said, looking directly at Helen. "Are you prepared to testify? In court, under oath, possibly being cross-examined by aggressive lawyers trying to discredit you?" "Yes," Helen replied without hesitation. "I've been through all this. I lost everything. I almost lost myself. I won't give up now. I'll see it through to the end." Fiona nodded, seeming satisfied. "Then let's make it happen. You'll stay here tonight. I'll put 2 agents at the door. Tomorrow morning, we'll go to a safer location while we build the case. And Mark," she turned to him, "I'll send someone to pick up your daughter and bring her here too. She'll be safe with you." Mark thanked her, relieved. The idea of having Olivia close again, of being able to protect her personally, was comforting. Aaron stood up. "I'll pick up the girl myself," he offered. "I know the way, and I know how to be discreet. She'll be more at ease seeing a familiar face." "Thank you, Aaron," Mark said, shaking his friend's hand. "For everything." Aaron smiled. "That's what friends do, man. Besides," he added with a twinkle in his eye, "this story is going to earn a lot of free beers when it's all over." After Aaron and Fiona left, Mark and Helen were alone in the room. The tension of the past few days seemed to finally begin to dissipate, replaced by a deep weariness. Mark sat on the edge of the bed, burying his face in his hands. Helen sat beside him, hesitantly. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. "Just processing everything," Mark replied, lifting his head. "It's been a lot in a very short time." "I know," Helen said. "And I'm sorry I brought this into your life. You didn't deserve to be dragged into this mess." Mark turned to look at her. "Don't apologize," he said. "I made my choices, and I don't regret any of them." "Even with all the danger? Even putting Olivia at risk?" "Especially because of that," Mark replied. "I want Olivia to grow up in a world where people help each other, where doing the right thing isn't punished, where justice truly means something. And the only way to create that world is by being an example of it. Helen felt her eyes fill with tears. You are an incredible person, Mark. Do you know that? He gave a small smile. I'm just a jobless caretaker trying to do the best I can. You're much more than that, Helen said with conviction. You're brave, generous, honest. You have values that many people with far more resources don't. There was a moment of silence between them. A silence laden with unspoken things, with feelings that were beginning to blossom amidst the chaos. Helen, Mark began hesitantly, when all this is over, what will you do? She thought for a moment. Honestly, I don't know. I'll have to rebuild my life from scratch. Maybe go back to finance, but somewhere honest this time, maybe change careers completely. But one thing I know. What? I don't want to lose you, she said, her voice filled with emotion. You and Olivia, you've become important to me. More important than I imagined possible in such a short time. Mark felt his heart quicken. You've also become important to us, he admitted. Olivia asks about you all the time, and I can't imagine my life without you in it now. Helen held his hand, intertwining their fingers. Then you don't have to imagine, she whispered. They stayed like that for a long moment, hands intertwined, looking at each other. There was so much they wanted to say, but words seemed inadequate. So instead of speaking, Helen leaned in and rested her head on Mark's shoulder. He put his arm around her, pulling her close. There, in that anonymous hotel room, after days of fear and flight, they finally found a moment of peace, a moment where they could just be two tired people, leaning on each other, finding comfort in each other's presence. A few hours later, Aaron returned with Olivia. The girl ran into Mark's arms as soon as she entered the room, then turned and hugged Helen with equal enthusiasm. It was clear she had missed them both. Fiona also returned, bringing news. The broadcast had made a bigger impact than they expected. The hashtag related to the case was among the top trending topics on social media. Politicians were speaking out. Journalists were investigating. The pressure on Alliance was immense. Tomorrow we officially begin the operation, Fiona announced. We're going to arrest everyone involved. It will be coordinated, simultaneous. They won't have a chance to destroy evidence or escape. That night, the three stayed together in the room. Olivia slept in the bed between Mark and Helen, while the adults talked in low voices about plans for the future. Plans that for the first time included real hope. Mark looked at Helen sleeping in the chair beside the bed, exhausted but finally at peace. He looked at Olivia sleeping soundly, safe and protected. And he felt grateful for having made the choices he made, for having opened his door, for having believed, for having fought. Tomorrow would be a new day, and hopefully it would be the beginning of something better for all of them. 3 weeks passed since that night at the hotel. 3 weeks that felt simultaneously like an eternity and a blink of an eye. Agent Fiona's operation was executed with surgical precision. The morning after the hotel meeting, more than 20 arrest warrants were served simultaneously. Helen's former boss was detained in his luxurious mansion. Members of the board of directors were escorted from their homes still in their pajamas. Even Victor, the man who had pursued them, was arrested trying to leave the country. The news dominated all channels. Alliance Corporation, one of the country's largest conglomerates, was being dismantled. The embezzled funds totaled over $5 billion, money that should have gone to infrastructure, hospitals, schools, money stolen from taxes, bids, public contracts. And Helen was the heroine who had exposed it all. But Helen didn't feel like a heroine. She felt exhausted, relieved, and strangely empty. After so much time fighting, so much energy spent just to survive, now that it was all over, she didn't quite know what to do with herself. During those 3 weeks, she, Mark, and Olivia remained under protection in a government-provided safe house. It was a comfortable place in a quiet suburban area of the capital city, with discreet agents guarding the entrance. There, away from the spotlight and threats, they had established a strangely domestic routine. Mark cooked. Helen helped Olivia with her homework. They watched movies together at night, played board games, talked for hours after Olivia went to sleep. They were like a family formed under the most improbable circumstances, but a family nonetheless. On the 10th day, Helen's lawyer appeared with news. Her accounts had been unblocked. All lawsuits against her were withdrawn. And there was more. Alliance was offering a substantial settlement to prevent her from suing them for moral and material damages. It was millions, enough money that she would never have to work again if she didn't want to. Helen looked at the document the lawyer had brought, the number with so many zeros that it seemed unreal. She should feel victorious. She should be celebrating, but all she felt was a strange emptiness. "Accept it," Mark encouraged her that night as they discussed the matter. "You deserve it. After everything you've been through, you deserve to be compensated." But Helen just shook her head. "It's not about the money," she said. "It never was. It was about doing the right thing. It was about justice." "You can have both," Mark argued gently. "You can accept the compensation and still have done the right thing. One doesn't cancel out the other." Helen finally agreed and signed the papers. But when the money was deposited into her account, she felt strangely disconnected from it. It was as if those numbers meant nothing real, not when compared to the things that truly mattered. In the 3rd week, Agent Fiona came to visit them with more news. The main accused had accepted plea bargains. The process would be long, but conviction was certain. Helen would probably have to testify at some points, but the worst was over. They were free to return to their lives. Their lives. Helen reflected on that phrase. What life did she have to return to? Her apartment had been sold to pay debts months ago. Her belongings were lost or discarded. She had no job, no home, nothing but a well-funded bank account and a deep sense of displacement. Mark also seemed restless. He had called his former employer and found that his caretaker position had been filled. He would have to look for another job, and although he didn't admit it aloud, the idea of returning to that small apartment, of resuming the old routine, felt wrong now. As if something fundamental had changed and there was no going back. It was Olivia, with the inadvertent wisdom of children, who expressed what both were feeling. "Why can't Helen live with us?" she asked one night during dinner, with the direct simplicity of a 6-year-old. "I like it when she's here. The house feels better." Mark and Helen exchanged glances. Olivia had verbalized exactly what both had been thinking, but feared to say. "Adults are complicated, sweetheart," Mark tried to explain. "Helen has her own life. She—" "Actually," Helen interrupted him softly, "I don't. Not anymore. And, if I'm honest, I don't know if I want to. Not the life I had before." There was a heavy silence. Olivia continued eating, oblivious to the tension between the adults. "What do you want?" Mark asked finally, his voice low. Helen looked at him, then at Olivia, then around the house they had shared for the past few weeks. "This," she said simply. "I want this. You two. A family. A real home. Not just a place to sleep. I want to be part of your lives, if you'll let me." Mark felt his chest tighten with emotion. "You already are," he said. "Olivia loves you, and I do too." The words hung in the air. It was the first time either of them had admitted aloud what was growing between them. It was no longer just gratitude or circumstance. It was something real, something deep. "I love you too," Helen whispered, her eyes shining with tears. "I love both of you. And I know it might seem too fast, too crazy, but sometimes the best things in life happen that way," Mark completed, holding her hand across the table. "Unexpected, against all odds, and completely right." Few days later, when police protection was officially ended, they had to make practical decisions. Helen could buy any house she wanted now, something large and luxurious in an upscale neighborhood. Mark could return to his small apartment and try to rebuild his life alone. They could go their separate ways, each resuming their own journey, but the idea of separating, even temporarily, felt wrong, unbearable. During the days of protection, they had become more than allies in a fight. They had become life partners. Mark knew how Helen took her coffee, always with one more spoon of sugar than she admitted. Helen knew that Mark sang in the shower when he was happy and became quiet when something worried him. Olivia had created routines with both of them, like reading with Helen before bed and playing video games with Mark on weekends. It was a dynamic that worked, that felt natural, and neither of them wanted to lose it. Or they could do something completely different. It was Helen who suggested it first. "How about we start fresh, together? A new house for a new family. Nothing extravagant, just a place that's ours." Mark agreed without hesitation. And so, in the 4th week after the operation, they moved into a modest house in a quiet suburban area of the capital city. It had 3 bedrooms, a small backyard, and was close to a good school for Olivia. Helen paid cash, but insisted that Mark's name be on the deed too. "We're a team now," she explained. "What's mine is ours." The move was chaotic and joyful. Olivia chose the color for her room, a vibrant purple that made Mark wince but which Helen enthusiastically approved. Mark assembled the furniture while Helen unpacked boxes, and slowly, day after day, the house transformed into a home. Helen did not return to work immediately. She decided to take some time for herself, something she had never done in her adult life. She volunteered at an organization that helped homeless people, finding a way to give back to the community that had welcomed her in her most difficult moment. She also began giving lectures on corporate ethics and the importance of whistleblowing. Mark found work as a maintenance supervisor in an office complex. The salary was better than that of a caretaker and allowed him more time with his family. He also began studying at night, resuming his technical training that he had abandoned years ago. And Olivia flourished, with a stable family structure. With 2 present and attentive parental figures, she became more confident, happier. Her grades improved. She made new friends. And whenever anyone asked about her family, she spoke with pride about her father and about Helen, whom she affectionately called Auntie, although everyone knew it was much more than that. 6 months after the arrest of the Alliance executives on a warm summer evening, Mark and Helen were sitting in the backyard after Olivia went to sleep. The sky was clear, dotted with stars. They drank cheap wine and talked about everything and nothing. "You know," Helen said suddenly, putting her book aside, "sometimes it still feels like a dream, all of this, as if I'm going to wake up and find out I'm still alone, running, hopeless." Mark left the barbecue and approached her. "This is real," he said, taking her hand. "You're here, I'm here, Olivia's here, and we're going to stay here, together." "I know," Helen smiled. "And that's why I wake up grateful every day, for having found you, for having had the courage to ask for help that night, for you having had the kindness to open your door to a desperate stranger." "You weren't a stranger," Mark said, "not even that night. There was something about you, from the very first moment, a light that refused to be extinguished, no matter how much they tried to smother it. And I saw that light, and I wanted to protect it." "And you did protect it," Helen said softly. "You saved me, Mark, in every possible way." "We saved each other," he corrected. "Because you saved me too. You showed me that it's worth fighting, for what's right. You showed me what real love is. You gave me a complete family." Olivia chose that moment to run up to them, jumping onto Mark's lap. "Daddy, when's the food ready? I'm starving." The adults laughed. "Soon, sweetheart. Just a few more minutes." Olivia got off his lap and ran back to her dolls, humming a song she had learned at school. Mark and Helen watched her for a moment, both thinking how lucky they were. That night, when Olivia finally fell asleep after much resistance, Mark and Helen sat on the living room couch. The television was on, but neither of them was paying attention. They were too busy just being together, enjoying the peace and comfort of each other's presence. "You know what I realized?" Helen said thoughtfully. "I used to measure my life in professional achievements, promotions, salaries, titles, but now I measure it in moments like this: family dinners, Olivia's laughter, you holding my hand, and I realize I wasted so much time chasing things that didn't matter." "But those experiences brought you here," Mark pondered. "If you hadn't worked at that company, you wouldn't have discovered the corruption. If you hadn't discovered it, you wouldn't have run away. If you hadn't run away, you would never have knocked on my door, so maybe everything was necessary to bring us to this moment." Helen considered his words. "Perhaps you're right. Perhaps everything I went through, all the suffering, all the loss, was the price I had to pay to find real happiness, and if that was the price, it was worth every second." They embraced, And in that embrace was contained the entire journey they had traveled together. From distrust to trust, from fear to courage, from loneliness to love. It was an improbable story, but it was theirs, and it was real. And so, in a modest house in the capital city, a family continued its life. A family formed not by blood or convention, but by choice, by love, by courage. A family that proved that sometimes, in the most unexpected places and in the darkest moments, we find exactly what we needed. And we discover that home is not a place. It's the people we choose to love. It's the hand we follow when all seems lost. It's the heart that beats in sync with ours. That's it, and always it. And will be. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Mark, Helen, and Olivia has touched your hearts as much as it touched ours in telling it. This journey of courage, love, and redemption reminds us that doing the right thing, even when it seems impossible, is always worth it. If this emotional narrative moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that explore the depth and complexity of human life. Leave a like if you believe that kindness still exists in the world, and tell us in the comments what moment touched you most in this story. Share it with someone who needs to believe that happy endings are possible. Every day we bring unique stories that will make you reflect, feel, and believe in the power of love and family. Until the next story.